If you would, go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 22, verse 36. Matthew 22, verse 36. And if I were to say to you, what are the most important things to your continued life? You might say something like food and water are pretty significant. Maybe clothing would be on the top end of your list of some important things. Maybe shelter would be important. If I were to say to you, what's the most important thing to your car continuing to move? Well, there are lots of things, but if you don't have gas, you get nowhere, right? That's sort of a foundational kind of thing. If I were to say, what's the most important component of winning a football game? It would be scoring touchdowns. That's what it boils down to. That's what you have to do to win, scoring points. Well, somebody came to Jesus and said, Jesus, we want to know kind of what's the most important commandment in the law. What's the most important thing to being a follower of the Lord? What's the most important thing to being faithful to Yahweh, to being faithful to the Lord? So what is, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And that's our passage today, Matthew chapter 22, verse 36. A lawyer says to Jesus, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Can we pray this morning? God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you give us very clearly the two greatest commandments. Lord, I pray that we would have a genuine faith in the Lord our God. And I pray that it would reflect in the ways that we love you with every ounce of our being, all of who we are and all of what we have. Lord, I pray that we would love you in a way that would glorify you and bring praise to you. Lord, help us also to love our neighbors, not just love them, but to love them in the same ways that we love ourselves. Lord, help us. These commandments seem so simple, seem so clear, yet I find them incredibly difficult to keep. Lord, help me and help us to obey your commandments. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Which is the great commandment in the law? Now, if you've read the Old Testament, who's read some or all of the Old Testament? Anybody read some or all? Just any of the Old Testament. If you read any of the Old Testament, you will come up very quickly realizing that there are lots and lots and lots of laws in the Old Testament. Has anybody read Leviticus lately? Anybody read Leviticus lately? It's not something we normally pick up. A couple of us have read Leviticus lately. It's not something you normally pick up for devotional type of reading, right? When you read Leviticus, it's because, boy, I'm going to read through the Bible this year, and this thing is in my way. So I've got to read Leviticus. That's kind of the attitude we kind of have sometimes towards Leviticus. It's a book filled with laws and filled with strange things that show us something very clear about God. By the way, this is a little bonus, something. The book of Leviticus and actually all of the law shows us how holy the Lord is and how very specific He is in His requirements of us, and really ultimately shows us the reason that we need Jesus, because we can't keep all of those laws. We can't keep all of those commandments. You can't do everything that the book of Leviticus calls you to do. That's an aside. That was a bonus. That's a little something extra for today. But anyway, if you're reading the Old Testament, you'll see there's lots and lots of laws in the Old Testament. And so it would be a logical question, I would think, to come to somebody like Jesus, who is a teacher of the law, who is a rabbi as far as the Jews are concerned, who is obviously, to us, the Son of God. It would make a lot of sense to come to Him and say, hey, I'm kind of curious. What would you say is the greatest commandment in all of the law? There's a lot, Would it be the first commandment of the 10 Commandments? Would it be something obscure? What would Jesus say? Now we know, most of us know probably, that the intention here was to ultimately trap Jesus in some form of a religious trick. Anyway, they were trying to kind of get Him. They were doing everything they could to kind of get at Jesus and find some way to condemn Him for being a lawbreaker or being blasphemous or being something like that. But Jesus, He does something that ultimately, if you read the other accounts in the Gospels, if you read another account in the Gospels, you'll see that this lawyer goes, you know what? You're exactly right. I can't argue with that. But anyway, so Jesus, he says, Jesus, which is the great commandment in the law? And here's Jesus' response. You know it. You've heard this passage probably 1,000 times before. You shall love the Lord your God. Stop. You shall love the Lord your God. We need to love the right God. We need to love the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We need to love the God who has created everything. The Lord, your God. So you can't get by with just any old God. You can't just say, well, I believe in a God, or I believe in some God, or I believe in some being other than us. That doesn't cut it. You can't cling to Islam or to Mormonism or to although they would say they believe in the same God, but vastly different. You can't cling to Buddhism. You can't cling to Hinduism. You can't cling to any other form of religion. You must love the Lord your God, the very specific God of the Jews, the very specific God of Abraham, the very specific God. That is the one that you must love. And so, in order to do any of what He's about to tell us, you must have a right relationship with the Lord. You must have a right relationship with God Himself. And so, that's really the foundation of all of this, is having that relationship with Him. And so if you need to trust Christ today, if you need to become a follower of the Lord your God, now is your chance. You shall love the Lord your God. How? With all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Now, how many of you have ever been married? You are married, or you are widowed, or you something like that. Lots of you. How many of you have ever just been dating or courting? Anybody ever dated or courted anyone? No, you folks are lying to me. I know it. Most of you just aren't raising your hands. It's all right. You know, when you're dating, when you're courting, when you're seeking after guys, men especially, you say all sorts of flattery kind of things. You know, you love them with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, right? And then you get married and these women just complain because you aren't loving them anymore like you used to, all those sorts of things. You don't say the things you used to say anymore. This almost comes off so sappy it's hard to buy. But what's Jesus getting at? It's not that it's compartmentalized into your heart and your soul and your mind. What is he getting at? He's saying it's that you love the Lord with all of yourself. You love the Lord with everything that you have. You love the Lord mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You love the Lord physically. You love the Lord in every way that you possibly can. Period. Love the Lord, your God, with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. What are some ways that we can love the Lord with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our mind? Well, think about the things that you have to give to the Lord. What about your own time and energy? Now, how many of you would say that you have given a lot of time in service to the Lord over your lifetime? Okay, some of you don't want to be so participating today, so that's all right. Participatory, anyway. You have a lot of time and you have a lot of energy. How many of you have been alive longer than me? Okay. Most of you. Watch out. Most of you. Some of you. So you've had a lot of time in your life. If you're my age, I'm 32, I think. Does it get worse? Do you forget how old you are more as you get older? I was afraid to hear that. That's too bad. 32 years of my life. I've been a believer since I was about 11. So that means, what's the math on that? That means 21 years. Okay? Never claimed to be a mathematician. Don't hold me to my math. 21 years. 21 years as a believer. Some of that time I just squandered, to be honest with you. Some of that time I as a believer, 21 years of my life, did not commit very much of my time to Him. I'll say from 11 to 19 years old, 18, 19 years old. I really didn't grow very much in my relationship with Christ. I didn't become much more like Jesus. I didn't really commit a whole lot of time to service to Him. I didn't really do a whole lot during those years, and so I wasted some of that time. But 21 years of my life to this point, I should have and could have been giving lots and lots of time to Him, and yet I find that I have squandered a lot of it. I've wasted a lot of it. I've not given as much of it as I should. So we've established that many of you are older than I am, which means you have probably had more years to serve the Lord. How many of you have been a Christian longer than 21 years? Quite a few of you have been a Christian longer than 21 years. That's great. That means you've had more time than I have to love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And so here's my question for you. Here's a question for you. Have you given all of the time that you think you could have to the Lord over the last 21 plus years? Have you committed as much time to Him as you should have, perhaps, over the last 21 plus years? Have you loved the Lord with all of your time, for example? I've not. There are times that I should be more committed to serving Him, and I waste it. What about your energy? How many of you have less energy now than you had a year ago? Virtually all of us. Energy. And yet the Lord calls us. How many of you still have energy? If you're alive today, you have some energy. We've got a few. We might want to check their pulse when we're done. Love the Lord with all your heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, everything, all your energy. Now let me just say something. Now you're going to say, well, you're 32, so what do you know? Okay, fair enough. I do know that at 21, I had much more energy than I have at 32. Now, some of you will say, boy, I wish I had 32-year-old energy, and I completely understand. All right? Completely get it. 32-year-old energy gets pretty sapped pretty worn out with chasing 4 small children with 7-year-old energy and 5-year-old energy and 3-year-old energy and 11-month-old energy, but that's a different story entirely. If you have any energy left, how many of you would say that you are using the energy that you currently have to faithfully love the Lord your God with every bit of it, every bit of your life? I don't know. Here's what I wonder, is when it gets harder, do we step further back? If you're still alive, the Lord has a purpose for you. The Lord wants you to still obey the greatest commandment, and that is to love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, everything that you have, right? The Lord still, if you are alive today, is calling you to serve Him. And so I wonder, are there ways that you could use your time or your energy, or how about your money, or how about your passions, or just the things that the Lord has given you a desire to do? Could you do those things in a way that would show more commitment to the Lord than you are currently giving Him? I don't know. For me, I know that I am not fully obedient to this first commandment. I want to be. I want to love the Lord with everything that I have, but that is incredibly difficult to do. Maybe some of you have figured out how. But my challenge to you is, if you aren't serving the Lord with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, examine how you might do that more faithfully for the days, weeks, months, and years remaining in your life. So the first greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. It's the great and foremost commandment. And then Jesus gives them a bonus commandment, because that's how Jesus functions. He says, this is the great and foremost commandment. And the second is very similar. The second's like it. And one guy says that maybe when he says the second is like it, he means the second is equal to it. Maybe it's not even that it's first and then second. Maybe it's that they are running kind of parallel there together. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, who is my neighbor? Anybody remember a smart guy asking Jesus, who's my neighbor? And you get a story of the Good Samaritan. Do you remember this story? You remember somebody saying to Jesus, who's my neighbor? What does Jesus say? He tells him this little story. He says this guy going down the road, and he gets beat up real bad. He's in the street nearly dead. And this priest comes by, this Levite comes by, these religious people that you think will take care of him come by. Nobody does anything. They walk on the other side of the road. And then a Samaritan comes by, and this would be a person they wouldn't think very highly of. Samaritan comes by and says, hey, can I help this guy? Sure, I can help this guy. I'm going to pay for his hotel, and I'm going to pay for somebody to take care of him, and I'm going to give all of these things to him. And Jesus then asked the smart guy who asked the question, who was the neighbor? And the smart guy says, the one who showed mercy. The one who showed mercy. So the Samaritan, the guy you wouldn't expect, the one who shows mercy to others, is the neighbor. So how do we love our neighbors? How are we going to show mercy? How do you love yourself? That's an interesting question. Do you try to take care of yourself? If you break your leg, what will be your first priority when that occurs? Stop the pain. Get to a doctor. Get this fixed. It'll take priority over virtually everything else. Why? Because you love yourself enough that you don't want to hurt anymore. You don't want that pain. If you have a heart attack, if your left side of your arm begins to tingle all the way down, and you begin to get a little bit short of breath, and you begin to struggle with your life, what is your first priority at that moment? Get to a doctor. Take the nitroglycerin in this little pouch off of you, and you get to the doctor. Those folks that have had those heart problems know about that. If you're hungry, boy, I get, Jennifer can testify to this. I'm not a very good hungry person. When I get hungry, I get grumpy. See, your wife just sold you out, Steve. She pointed right at it. Melissa pointed right at Steve. When I get hungry, I get grumpy. Have you seen those Snickers commercials? You're not yourself when you're hungry. Boy, I think that's me right there. But Snickers doesn't do the job for me, by the way. I got to have more than that. When I get hungry, my first priority is to eat. I need food. I get irritable. I get grumpy. When I get sleepy, I may be worse when I'm sleepy than when I'm hungry. And you certainly don't want me hungry and sleepy at the same time. This is just terrible. Get sleepy. It's a high priority. Some of you are experiencing it right now. Nap time. You get hungry, you get sleepy. First priority is get a little nap. Melissa, you work nights sometimes. That must be difficult. I wouldn't like that. I'd be asleep half the time I was there. Well, you get thirsty. Have you ever been dehydrated? Anybody ever been like hospitalized dehydrated? Anybody? A few. Well, if you don't drink, you'll die. And so your priority is drink fluids. So now, it was an accident that these things got left up here. I forgot about them, to be honest with you. But they work as a perfect example of what we're trying to discuss right now. There are some people in the Middle East right now that are suffering in ways that I can't imagine. People that are threatened at every moment with their very lives. People that have been run out of their homes, people that have no food, people that have no clothing, people that have nothing, and they are piling up in refugee camps all over Eastern Europe. These are going to Greece, right? This is going to Greece. And so when I get home tonight, by the way, who enjoyed the extra hour of sleep last night? A few of you. When I get home, I'll sleep in my comfortable bed. There are some of our neighbors in the Middle East that are sleeping on the ground and would be thankful to have this little camping pad right here. And you gave money, some of you gave money, to Syrian refugees that bought this little pad. Boy, it's not exactly a very good mattress. It's not exactly a high-quality bed, but I bet it would beat the ground. And you, in an effort to show how you love your neighbors, gave. And so thank you for that. Shoes. I had wet feet all night last night. We had trunk or treat here. And so me, not wanting other people to suffer out in the rain, I'm carrying my umbrella out trying to help people who didn't really want my help anyway. Oh, we'll just run or whatever. But I wound up getting my feet wet out there. I don't like wet feet. You can imagine walking around barefooted in the Middle East. I mean, you guys have given shoes to help folks who need it. Clothes, socks, stuff I can't explain up here. Diapers. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now here's the deal. There are people in the Middle East suffering. And there are people in Laurel suffering. Not the same ways. Not exactly the same ways. But people in Laurel that need us to love them in the same ways that we love ourselves. And so I wonder how we can do that. I'll tell you just a few, and then we'll be done, and we can go eat the soup that your tummies are telling you should be eating right now. One thing you can do to love your neighbors is help us with little simple events like we had last night. Yeah, there was a tornado warning, and so you have a little built-in excuse for last night. But one thing you can do is just help to love on your neighbors by showing, I love my kids. I want my kids to be happy. we provided an opportunity last night for a few kids in our neighborhood who really have very little to be happy. One lady came here, sat all night with her 2 grandchildren, watching Charlie Brown, the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. She sat there while her 2 little grandchildren played around for a while, and I went and talked to her, and I said, "Hey, we're glad you're here." And she said, "Well, we're glad to be here too." They wanted to do something, and she said there really was nothing we could do. There wasn't anything that they had to do tonight, and we were thankful to have you guys. And it was just an opportunity for us to love on them, to tell them that we love them, to give them an opportunity to be happy for a few minutes. There's some people with even bigger needs than that in our community. And one way you could get involved in helping with that is the Christian Food Mission. There's some people in our community that need food. You can help volunteer at the Christian Food Mission. We've got quite a few that do that. There's some other things. Laurel Crisis Pregnancy Center, or Center for Pregnancy Choices, rather, is the Crisis Pregnancy Center here in Laurel. And did you know, I hope you know, that we host their baby store here. And what that is the women that come to the Laurel Center for Pregnancy Choices that are deciding whether to have an abortion or whether to keep their baby. When they decide to keep their baby, the pregnancy center tries to help them get the basic necessities that they need for their babies. So diapers and clothes. And so they call it a store, but they don't actually sell anything. They give to these women that decide to have their babies. And that's right back here in our church. Thank you for letting them host that. But I bet they could use more volunteers counseling women at the clinic here, right downtown. And then maybe we as a church need to get a little more hands-on. So you can get involved in the current ministries that we're doing. You can get involved in parachurch ministries, and maybe we as a church should figure out a way that maybe we can host a clothes closet or a food pantry or find some way to interact with our community in a way that we'd love them as we love ourselves. I don't know the answers, but I bet the Lord could tell us. I bet the Lord could impress on you and the Lord could impress on me the ways that we could impact our community in a way that would show them that we love them as we love ourselves. 2 great commandments, you already know them. I don't have any brand new information for you. But here's what I want you to do is when we get done in just a moment, I want you to pray and I want you to ask the Lord to help you to love Him with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your soul. And I want you to ask Him to help you to love Laurel, Jones County, and all of our neighbors in a merciful way, just as we love our very selves. I'm going to pray, and then Jennifer's going to play for us, and we're going to have a time of reflection and a time of response. And if you need to respond today, you feel free to do so. But I'm going to pray, and then Jennifer will play for us. Father, we thank you.